In Bishan, a district of Chongqing almost no one outside China has ever heard of, engineers just switched on a ground station built to catch solar power beamed wirelessly from orbit, a source of electricity that no night, no cloud, and no storm can ever shut off. Before we go deeper, if you want to catch the next one of these before everyone else does, subscribe and turn on notifications. If you have ever been told that solar power simply cannot work at night, hold that thought, because that is exactly the belief that just cracked in Bishan. Here is the story the West has told itself for as long as solar panels have existed. Solar has one flaw, and it is fatal, and it is permanent. The sun sets. Clouds roll in. A storm parks itself overhead for 3 days. And every panel on Earth, no matter how advanced, goes dark. Half of every single day, your power source simply switches off, and no battery ever built fully closes that gap. That is the wall. That is the comfortable little truth that made everyone feel safe. Solar is nice, but it will always need something else to back it up. Now hold that thought against what just happened in Bishan, a district of Chongqing in southwest China. Engineers there switched on a ground receiving station, not a bigger panel, not a better battery. A station built to catch solar power that was never collected on the ground at all. Solar power gathered above the clouds, in orbit, and sent down through open air. And that changes the whole equation, because up there, the rules are different. Down here, the sun always sets. Above the clouds, it never does. There is no night in geostationary orbit the way there is night in your backyard. No weather, no storm season. Just raw, uninterrupted sunlight, hour after hour, day after day, forever. A panel on your roof works maybe a quarter of the time. A panel above the atmosphere works almost all of it. So here is what I am going to walk you through. By the end, you will understand exactly how sunlight hanging in space becomes real current moving through a wire on the ground. You will understand why NASA, the European Union, and Japan all chased this same dream for decades and kept turning back. And you will understand why a rig in a district you cannot find on a map has serious engineers watching very, very closely. Stay with me, because the part almost every headline skips is how the power actually gets down to the ground. And that is where this gets strange, because this is not a new idea. That is the part people miss. The concept is old. Call it 70 years of fantasy. Scientists sketched it out back when the space race was young. And the biggest names on Earth took it seriously. NASA studied space-based solar power in the 1970s and drew up entire station designs. Japan's space agency kept a program alive for decades. The European Union funded its own studies. These were not cranks. These were the smartest, best-funded engineers on the planet, and every one of them walked up to the same problem, stared at it, and turned around. For 70 years, it stayed exactly where it started. A beautiful idea that nobody could actually build. A curve that stayed flat and flat and flat. And it was not the collecting that stopped them. Putting a solar array in orbit is hard, but it is not the impossible part. Rockets go up, panels unfold. We have done that thousands of times. No, the wall, the real wall, the one that turned this into science fiction for 3 generations, was everything that comes after you have got the electricity up there. You have a power plant's worth of energy sitting in orbit, hundreds of kilometers straight up. And now you have to get it down. And that raises the bigger question this whole story keeps circling. How does anyone see a move like this coming before the rest of the world does? Because orbital solar did not appear overnight. The signals were there for anyone reading the pattern. And China follows a pattern, sector by sector, that most people only notice once the markets have already moved. That is exactly what a guide called the China Signal is built for. It decodes what Beijing is actually constructing next, in energy, in technology, in infrastructure, one sector at a time, so you can spot the early moves like space-based solar before they turn into tomorrow's headlines. If you are tired of finding out about these breakthroughs after everyone else, the link is in the description, and it hands you the framework to read China's rise with confidence instead of scrambling to catch up. So back to that plant sitting in orbit, hundreds of kilometers up, with all that energy and no way home. Think about what that actually means. There is no cable that long. There is no wire strong enough, and there never will be. You cannot run an extension cord to a satellite, so the energy just sits up there, gathered, converted, ready, with nothing but empty sky between it and the ground below. That is the wall every space agency slammed into, and every one of them turned back. Not how to gather sunlight in orbit, but how to push a full power plant's worth of energy across hundreds of kilometers of empty air. No cable, no wire, nothing between the satellite and the ground but sky. So here is how you actually cross it. No cable, no wire, just hundreds of kilometers of empty air. And it turns out the answer is simpler and stranger than it sounds. Step 1. You park a satellite in what engineers call geostationary orbit. That word sounds technical, but the idea is almost cozy. The satellite hovers over the exact same spot on Earth, moving in perfect step with the planet's spin, so from the ground, it looks like it just hangs there, frozen in the sky. And way up there, something remarkable is true. There is no atmosphere to dim the light. There is no night to switch it off. No atmosphere, no night. The sun simply never sets. A panel down here on your roof works maybe 6 good hours a day. That same panel, parked in geostationary orbit, drinks full, undiluted sunlight around the clock. Step 2 is the easy part. That sunlight hits solar panels, the same kind bolted onto rooftops all over the world, and gets turned into electricity. Nothing exotic, nothing new. Just ordinary panels, permanently in full sun, never clouded, never dark. Now step 3. This is where it gets strange. You take that electricity and you turn it into microwaves. Yes, microwaves. The same invisible waves that heat your lunch in the kitchen. Except these are tuned to a single clean frequency and aimed like a flashlight beam, instead of bouncing around a little metal box. And I know exactly what you were thinking. A giant microwave beam, pointed straight down at Earth. Stay with that thought, because the real answer is far less scary than it sounds, and we get to it. For now, just hold the picture. Step 4. A huge antenna up in orbit gathers those microwaves and beams them down to a patch of ground far below, a field of receivers we call a rectenna. Odd word. It just means a rectifying antenna. Break that apart, and it is honest about what it does. An antenna that catches the incoming microwaves, and a rectifier that turns them straight back into usable electric current. Microwaves in from the sky, ordinary electricity out into the grid. Try to picture it this way. The rectenna pulls power out of that beam the exact same way a radio antenna pulls a song out of thin air. The music was always there, traveling invisibly through the room around you. You just needed the right catcher, tuned to the right signal, to grab it. Same trick here. The energy is riding through the air the whole time. The rectenna is simply the catcher. That is the whole mechanism. Sunlight up high. Electricity. Microwaves down. Current on the ground. So if it is that clean, why did the smartest space agencies on Earth spend 70 years staring at it and walking away? 3 walls. And ask yourself which of these three sounds most impossible: the weight, the distance, or the cost. Because China had to climb all three at once. Wall 1, the weight. To do this properly, you need an antenna and a solar array so enormous that lifting the whole thing into space was simply beyond what any rocket could carry. Too heavy to fly. Wall 2, the distance. A microwave beam does not stay a tidy little pencil. Over hundreds of kilometers it spreads, it widens, it bleeds power the further it travels, so by the time it reached the ground, too much of it had leaked away into nothing. Wall 3, the cost. And this was the real killer. The cost per kilogram to orbit, the price to haul a single kilogram of anything up into space, was so brutal that building a power station up there was not engineering. It was fantasy. On paper, forever. So what changed? Two things, and they changed everything. First, cheap heavy lift rockets. The cost per kilogram to orbit did not tick down a little. It collapsed, dropping the price of putting mass in space to a fraction of what it once was. Suddenly, that third wall, the fantasy wall, had a door in it. Second, modular assembly. This is the clever one. You stop trying to launch a single impossible megastructure in one heroic shot. Instead, you launch pieces, panels, trusses, sections, and you click them together up in orbit, like snapping together lengths of track until the layout is as big as you want. The weight wall does not disappear. You just walk through it one manageable piece at a time. Weight, distance, cost. For 70 years, 3 walls. And all at once, the math that made this pure science fiction quietly stopped being science fiction. Which is where this stops being a thought experiment. Because China has a name attached to this. A real plan, tied to a real person, the rocket scientist Long Lehao, one of the central figures behind China's launch program. And the plan is not modest. It is a solar station a full kilometer wide, hanging in geostationary orbit. Let that sit for a moment. 1 kilometer. A structure wider than most airports, floating in permanent sunlight. And here is how Chinese state media chose to describe it. They called it an energy project as significant as taking the Three Gorges Dam, China's single largest power plant, the biggest hydroelectric station on the planet, and moving it into space. Hold that image. The Three Gorges Dam, lifted off the Yangtze River and hung in orbit. And hold a little skepticism too, because that is a staggering thing to claim. A solar station, a kilometer wide, in orbit, that China's own state media calls the Three Gorges Dam, moved into space, and tied to one named real scientist, Long Lehao. Which forces the only question that matters now. Is any of this actually real? Or is it the most ambitious piece of state media theater ever staged? So let's answer it, carefully, because it's the only question left that matters. And if you have been waiting this whole video for the catch, here it is, stated plainly, so you can judge for yourself what's proven and what isn't. Start with the honesty. Much of what we know about this comes through Chinese state media, and that alone earns a healthy dose of skepticism. State outlets have every reason to make the future sound like it already arrived. So when you hear a solar array a kilometer wide compared to the Three Gorges Dam moved into space, treat it as a promise, not a receipt. Second, that kilometer-scale array in orbit, it is not built. Not a single panel of it is hanging above the clouds right now. The megastructure that Long Lehao described lives for the moment, on paper and in engineering plans, not in geostationary orbit. And third, the rig in Bishan is a ground test, not a working power plant in the sky. Nobody up there is beaming a city's worth of electricity down to Chongqing tonight. What's running is an experiment, a proof of concept, engineers on the ground catching a signal and measuring how much of it survives the trip. So that's the catch. 3 parts. All of them real, all of them fair to hold against the hype. But here is where you have to be just as honest in the other direction. The receiving station in Bishan exists. You can point to it on a map. The wireless power transmission tests are actually running, instruments logging data, watts moving through open air without a single wire touching them. And that part cannot be walked back. The megastructure isn't up yet, but the direction is set. The people who called this physically impossible have already lost that argument because a working rig on the ground just did the hard part in miniature. Now let that reframe everything for you, because this is the part that reaches your own life. Picture a power source that never stops, not a metaphor. Day or night, clear sky or storm, a stream of clean electricity beamed down from orbit that simply does not care whether the sun has set where you're standing. Engineers call that a 24/7 clean baseload, and it is the one thing every renewable on Earth has never been able to promise. Solar quits at dusk. Wind quits when the air goes still. This wouldn't. And the moment you have power that never quits, the economics of energy fall apart and rebuild themselves. Think about gas peaker plants. Most people have never heard the term, so here's the plain version. A peaker plant is the expensive backup generator of the grid, the one that only fires up in the hours when solar and wind go dark and demand spikes. They're costly, they're dirty, and they exist for exactly one reason: to cover the gaps when the renewables sleep. Now imagine a source that has no gaps. Orbital solar never goes dark in the first place. Fill that hole, and you have just knocked the legs out from under an entire class of power plant that the modern grid was quietly built to depend on. And it climbs higher than your electricity bill. Whoever controls a power source that can't be switched off by night, by clouds, or by weather doesn't just add to the grid. They reshape who controls the energy market itself. Energy has always had a leash on it. Geography, sunlight, fuel you have to dig up and ship. A plant in orbit that runs on light that never fades cuts a lot of that leash away. And if the curve bends the way Bishan hints it might, China would hold a real lead in a domain the West still quietly files under science fiction. Which is exactly why alarmed engineers are watching a rig in a district most of us can't even pronounce. Washington should be paying attention. Tokyo should be paying attention. Brussels should be paying attention. And so should every utility that has bet its entire future on batteries alone. Because batteries store power, they don't make it. And they certainly don't make it in orbit above the weather. NASA chased this dream and stalled. Japan chased it and stalled. The European labs chased it and stalled. And now the country that everyone assumed was still catching up is the one with a receiver on the ground pulling energy out of the air. So come back to where we started. For decades, the West told itself the same comfortable story about solar power. The sun sets. The clouds roll in. Every panel on the planet goes dark for half of every day, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. That was the flaw baked into the whole idea. Permanent, physical, final. Except above the clouds, the sun never sets. There's no night up there, no weather, no dusk. And on a rig in Bishan, quietly, without much of the world noticing, China is testing whether that flaw was ever really permanent at all. This is how technology curves actually work. They look flat for a very, very long time. 70 years of this being pure fantasy, of brilliant labs turning back at the same walls, of the whole thing living in science fiction and nowhere else. Flat, flat, flat for so long that everyone assumes it will stay flat forever. And then, all at once, it is not flat at all. We don't know yet whether this is that moment. The array isn't up. The claims are run through state media. But the rig is real, the tests are running, and the comfortable belief that the sun always sets is being tested to destruction on the ground in Chongqing. So tell me down in the comments. Is orbital solar the real future of energy, or is it overhyped state media theater? And if it's real, which industry do you think it disrupts first? Drop it below, because the curve is either about to bend or it isn't. And the rig in Bishan is where we're all going to find out.